In May 1944, Hitler was convinced 150,000 Allied soldiers were massing in southeast England. He had aerial photographs, radio intercepts, intelligence reports. One problem: the entire army was fake. Every tank was inflatable. Every radio signal was a lie. The greatest military deception in history was about to fool the most powerful war machine ever built. The date is January 15, 1944. In a heavily guarded bunker beneath London, Winston Churchill stares at maps that spell out military disaster. The red pins marking German fortifications stretch from Norway to Spain, Hitler's Atlantic Wall. 2 million German troops, concrete bunkers thick enough to withstand naval bombardments, artillery positions covering every possible landing beach. You can feel the weight of the world pressing down on this room. The Holocaust is accelerating. Soviet forces are bleeding out on the Eastern Front. America's factories are churning out weapons, but time is running out. The Western Allies have one chance, one single opportunity, to open a second front in Europe before Nazi Germany becomes unbeatable. "Gentlemen," Churchill growls, cigar smoke wreathing his face, "we must invade France this summer. But Hitler knows we're coming. He's had 4 years to prepare. Every beach is a death trap." The mathematics of invasion are terrifying. Allied intelligence estimates that a direct assault on Calais, the closest point to England, would result in catastrophic casualties. Perhaps 100,000 dead in the first wave alone. The narrow English Channel there is perfect for German artillery. Rommel himself has called it impregnable. But there's an alternative: Normandy. The beaches are wider, less heavily defended. The problem? It's 150 miles further from England, harder to supply, and still bristling with German forces. More critically, if Hitler realizes the real target and moves his reserves there, the invasion becomes a massacre. General Omar Bradley spreads reconnaissance photos across the table. "Every German division we face in Normandy reduces our chances of success. We need Hitler to keep his reserves elsewhere. Anywhere but where we're actually landing." The room falls silent. How do you hide the largest military operation in human history? How do you convince the most paranoid dictator in history to look the wrong way when 2 million Allied lives hang in the balance? Colonel John Bevan, head of the London Controlling Section, clears his throat. He's about to propose something that sounds like science fiction. What if we created an entirely fictional army? Make Hitler believe we're attacking somewhere we're not? The generals exchange skeptical glances. Creating fake intelligence is one thing, but convincing German reconnaissance planes, spy networks, and codebreakers that 150,000 men exist when they don't? That's not military strategy. That's magic. It's been tried before. Air Marshal Lee Mallory objects. The Germans aren't fools. Their intelligence service is the best in the world. Himmler's SS has spies everywhere. But Churchill's eyes are gleaming. The man who survived the London Blitz understands the power of audacious thinking. Elaborate, Colonel. How exactly does one hide 250,000 men in plain sight? Bevan unfolds a map of southeast England, pointing to Dover and the Pas de Calais. We create the first United States Army Group, FUSAG. On paper, it's commanded by General George Patton, who the Germans consider our most dangerous general. We build fake camps, fake radio traffic, fake supply lines. We make Hitler believe the main invasion is coming here. And the real invasion? Bradley asks quietly. Goes in at Normandy while every German reserve sits uselessly at Calais, waiting for an army that will never come. The audacity is breathtaking. They're proposing to fight the entire German war machine with cardboard tanks, inflatable aircraft, and carefully orchestrated lies. It's the kind of desperate gamble that either wins wars or destroys armies. But as Churchill stubs out his cigar, everyone in the room understands. This isn't just about military tactics anymore. This is about weaponizing human psychology itself. They're about to discover whether the art of deception can defeat the science of war. 3 days later, a most unusual recruitment meeting takes place in a nondescript building near Piccadilly Circus. Colonel Dudley Clark, a lean man with piercing eyes and an Oxford accent, faces an audience that would puzzle any military observer. Film directors from Pinewood Studios, theatrical set designers from the West End, and special effects artists from the BBC. "Gentlemen," Clark begins, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who's fooled armies before. "We're about to embark on the largest theatrical production in human history. Our stage is Southeast England. Our audience is Adolf Hitler. And if we fail to convince him, millions of people die." Clark isn't exaggerating about his credentials. In North Africa, he created entirely fictional British divisions that confused Rommel for months. He invented ghost airports that existed only in German intelligence files. His fake military units tied down real Italian divisions, chasing shadows across the desert, while Montgomery flanked them at El Alamein. But Operation Fortitude makes his previous work look like amateur theater. The scale is staggering. They need to create physical evidence of 8 complete divisions, totaling 150,000 men, along with all their equipment, vehicles, and support infrastructure. And they have 4 months to do it. "The Germans will photograph everything," Clark explains, spreading aerial reconnaissance images across the table. Their Junkers 80s fly over Dover every morning at precisely 0800 hours. Every tent, every vehicle, every artillery piece must cast the correct shadow, face the proper direction, and appear weathered by realistic use. John Codner, a set designer who created the elaborate sword-fighting scenes in Hamlet, raises his hand. "What exactly are we building, sir? And with what materials?" "Inflatable tanks," Clark replies without a trace of humor. "Rubber aircraft, canvas trucks. We're going to convince Heinrich Himmler that Kent is crawling with Sherman tanks using materials from a children's bouncy castle factory." The room erupts in nervous laughter, but Clark silences them with a look. "This isn't amusing, gentlemen. Every detail must be perfect. A German photo interpreter notices one tank facing the wrong direction, and our deception crumbles. Hitler moves his panzer divisions to Normandy. Our boys hit the beaches facing twice as many guns. The technical challenges are mind-boggling. Real army camps have specific patterns. Tanks parked in precise formations, supply trucks positioned near fuel depots, command tents elevated for radio reception. German intelligence officers have studied these patterns for years. One inconsistency, and the entire operation collapses. "We need more than props," adds Major Ralph Ingersoll, an American intelligence officer. "We need the camps to look lived in. Mud tracks from vehicle movement, laundry lines, cook fire smoke. The Germans know what real soldiers look like from the air." This requires an extraordinary attention to detail. Teams of soldiers are assigned to drive real vehicles through the fake camps, creating authentic tire tracks. Others drag objects across the ground to simulate the organized chaos of military life. They hang wet uniforms on clotheslines, build fake anti-aircraft positions, and even construct dummy field hospitals. The inflatable equipment itself is a marvel of wartime innovation. British rubber companies, working in absolute secrecy, create tanks so realistic that Allied pilots flying overhead mistake them for real armor. The rubber Shermans even include fake gun barrels that cast proper shadows and dummy crews that appear to be performing maintenance. "Remember," Clark emphasizes, studying the faces around him, "we're not just building a movie set. We're creating an alternate reality. In that reality, George Patton commands the most powerful army in Europe, positioned to crush Hitler's Reich. That reality must be so convincing that German high command bets everything on stopping it." The psychological warfare extends beyond visual deception. Allied radio operators begin broadcasting thousands of fake messages, supply requests for non-existent units, weather reports for fictional airfields, medical evacuations for imaginary casualties. German codebreakers intercepting these signals gradually build a picture of massive military buildup opposite Calais. But here's what makes it brilliant, Clark concludes, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. The Germans won't just see what we show them. They'll convince themselves. Their own intelligence apparatus will become our greatest weapon. As the meeting disperses, each man understands the magnitude of their task. They're about to discover whether human creativity can outsmart human paranoia, whether artists and dreamers can defeat the most efficient killing machine in history. The clock is ticking. D-Day is 4 months away. And somewhere in Berlin, Heinrich Himmler is studying photographs of Kent, completely unaware that he's looking at the greatest magic trick ever performed. By March 1944, the transformation of Southeast England into a massive theater of war is breathtaking. From Dover to Ramsgate, the countryside buzzes with controlled chaos as the greatest deception in military history takes physical form. But this isn't ordinary military construction. It's the weaponization of make-believe. At dawn each day, teams of soldiers emerge from hidden bunkers carrying the strangest equipment ever deployed in warfare: foot pumps, rubber patches, and detailed instruction manuals written by toy manufacturers. Their mission? Inflate an entire armored division before German reconnaissance flights arrive at 0800. Watch as Sergeant Tommy Mackenzie from Glasgow carefully unfolds what appears to be a collapsed circus tent. Within 20 minutes, using compressed air from a portable pump, he's created a perfect replica of a Sherman tank, complete with fake treads and a gun barrel that casts exactly the right shadow. The rubber is thick enough to resist puncture from curious birds, painted in authentic olive drab and marked with the correct divisional insignia. "It's bloody mental," Mackenzie mutters, attaching fake antenna arrays to his inflatable masterpiece. "But if it keeps Jerry's panzers away from our lads in Normandy, I'll blow up 1,000 of these things." The attention to detail borders on obsession. Real tanks create specific wear patterns in the earth from their treads. So, teams drag weighted sleds through the fake camps, creating authentic-looking track marks. Actual Sherman tanks weigh 33 tons and sink slightly into soft ground. Engineers carefully calculate soil compression, creating subtle depressions around each inflatable tank. The psychological warfare extends to every aspect of camp life. Soldiers hang wet laundry on clotheslines, always hung in military fashion with identical spacing. They build real cook fires that produce authentic smoke plumes visible from reconnaissance aircraft. Dummy field kitchens are positioned where German intelligence experts expect them, downwind from sleeping areas, near water sources, protected from direct observation. Captain James Morrison, a former Hollywood special effects coordinator, oversees the most ambitious deception, creating the illusion of constant military activity. "The Germans know armies move," he explains to his team. "Static displays look fake. We need dynamic theater." This requires extraordinary choreography. Every morning, trucks drive predetermined routes between camps, creating fresh tire tracks. Soldiers march in formation across open fields during known German flyover times. Radio operators broadcast fake traffic about supply shortages, training exercises, and equipment maintenance, all carefully timed to coincide with German intelligence collection windows. The crown jewel of the operation is the fake supply port at Dover. German intelligence knows that any major invasion requires massive logistical support. Teams of engineers construct elaborate dummy landing craft, fake fuel depots, and enormous decoy supply dumps. From German reconnaissance aircraft, Dover appears to be the staging area for the largest amphibious assault in history. But the most crucial element isn't physical at all. It's radiological. Allied signals intelligence has broken German codes, revealing exactly which radio frequencies Berlin monitors most closely. British operators flood these frequencies with carefully crafted fake communications that gradually build a picture of massive American forces under Patton's command. Supply command to FUSAG headquarters? Crackles 1 intercepted transmission. Requesting additional fuel allocations for armored exercises. Current tank strength. 847 operational vehicles. The message is entirely fabricated, but German codebreakers dutifully file it away as evidence of growing Allied strength. The human cost of maintaining this elaborate fiction is enormous. Hundreds of soldiers live under constant pressure, knowing that one mistake, one inflatable tank left deflated, one radio message sent on the wrong frequency, could doom their comrades landing on distant beaches. Private Robert Chen from San Francisco spends his days maintaining a fake radio station that supposedly coordinates supply shipments for 30,000 non-existent soldiers. Sometimes I forget what's real anymore. He confides to his diary, "I've invented so many fake unit designations that I dream about imaginary battalions." The stakes become terrifyingly clear when Allied cryptographers intercept German intelligence assessments. Wehrmacht analysts are convinced that Patton commands the largest Allied army in England. They estimate FUSAG's strength at over 150,000 men, positioned perfectly for an assault on Calais. Hitler personally reviews these reports, directing his most elite panzer divisions to defend against an invasion that exists only in the imagination of Allied deception planners. As April arrives, the Phantom Army reaches full strength. Across Kent, thousands of soldiers maintain the fiction of massive military presence using nothing more than compressed air, canvas paint, and extraordinary human dedication. They've created a weapon that exists purely in Heinrich Himmler's mind, but it's about to prove more powerful than all the real tanks in Rommel's arsenal. The German reconnaissance flights continue their daily routine, photographing evidence of their own deception. And in Berlin, Wehrmacht strategists make plans to destroy an army that will never arrive, leaving the real landing beaches catastrophically undermanned. In a heavily secured building in Berlin's Wilhelmstrasse, Oberfuhrer Heinrich Müller spread reconnaissance photographs across his desk with the methodical precision of a man whose paranoia had kept him alive through multiple Nazi purges. As head of the Gestapo's Foreign Intelligence Division, Müller had survived Hitler's regime by trusting nothing and verifying everything. Today, these photos would test that philosophy to its limits. "Show me what you see," Müller commanded his best photo interpreter, Hauptmann Klaus Weber, a former university professor who could spot camouflage techniques that fooled other analysts. Weber adjusted his magnifying glass, studying the aerial images of Kent with scholarly intensity. "Herr Oberfuhrer, the buildup is unmistakable. Tank formations here, here, and here," he pointed with a wooden ruler. "Mobile artillery positions, temporary airstrips, supply depots that match known American logistical patterns." What Weber couldn't know was that he was examining the most sophisticated piece of theater ever created. Every tank he identified was filled with air. Every artillery piece was carved from wood. The supply depots contained nothing but painted canvas designed to cast convincing shadows. Muller walked to the wall map, where red pins marked confirmed Allied strength estimates. "Our agents in England report unusual radio traffic from these exact coordinates. Increased fuel deliveries to Dover. American officers speaking with Patton's distinctive accent, coordinating training exercises." These reports were devastatingly accurate and completely wrong. Allied counterintelligence had identified every German spy in England, then fed them a carefully crafted diet of false information. The increased fuel deliveries were trucks carrying empty barrels. The American officers were British actors trained to mimic Patton's Oklahoma drawl. The genius of Operation Fortitude lay in giving German intelligence exactly what they expected to find. Nazi analysts knew that any major invasion required massive preparation. Their own planning documents specified minimum troop concentrations, supply requirements, and communication patterns necessary for amphibious assault. The Allies simply created fake evidence that matched German expectations perfectly. The mathematics are conclusive, Weber continued, spreading calculation sheets across the photographs. Based on observed tank concentrations, fuel depot capacity, and communication volume, we estimate enemy strength at 8 divisions, minimum, possibly 12 if they're concealing reserve units. Miller nodded grimly. Weber's analysis was textbook perfect and exactly what Allied deception planners wanted him to conclude. German intelligence doctrine emphasized quantitative analysis, cross-referencing multiple data sources to build comprehensive threat assessments. The Allies exploited this systematic approach by ensuring that every source confirmed the same fictional reality. The intercepted radio traffic provided the most convincing evidence. German cryptographers, working around the clock, decoded hundreds of Allied messages requesting supplies for FUSAG operations. These communications followed proper American military protocol, used correct encryption procedures, and referenced real units with fictional locations. To German analysts, the pattern was unmistakable: massive American forces preparing for immediate deployment. But here's what concerns me, Weber added, pointing to a specific section of coastline. The concentration opposite Calais suggests they're planning a direct assault on the shortest crossing. Every military principle demands attacking at the point of maximum advantage. This observation revealed the psychological trap at Fortitude's heart. German military doctrine emphasized efficiency and logical planning. The shortest route from England to France was Dover to Calais. Therefore, any rational commander would attack there. Allied planners deliberately reinforced this assumption, making the fictional army's deployment appear strategically sensible. What German intelligence couldn't anticipate was the audacity of Allied thinking. While Miller's analysts studied photographs of inflatable tanks, the real invasion force was assembling 150 miles west in Portsmouth and Southampton. But German reconnaissance flights rarely ventured that far from the most obvious staging areas. Meanwhile, in London, British intelligence monitored German communications with growing satisfaction. Double agents reported that Wehrmacht High Command was moving elite panzer divisions to defend Calais. Intercepted messages showed German field commanders requesting additional anti-tank weapons for the expected landing zones. Hitler himself reviewed intelligence summaries that described Allied preparations in terrifying detail, all of it magnificent fiction. The human element of the deception proved crucial. German intelligence officers, under extreme pressure to provide accurate assessments, found confirming evidence everywhere they looked. Confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret information as supporting existing beliefs, became an Allied weapon. Every new reconnaissance flight, every intercepted radio message, every spy report reinforced Berlin's certainty that Calais was the target. Mein Oberfuhrer, Weber concluded, I recommend we brief the Führer that Allied invasion is imminent. Target, Pas de Calais. Timeline, 4 to 6 weeks maximum. Muller gathered the photographs, preparing for his most important briefing since the war began. In a few hours, he would present Hitler with intelligence so compelling, so thoroughly documented, and so completely wrong that it would change the course of history. As he walked toward Hitler's bunker, Muller carried the collective work of thousands of Allied soldiers, artists, engineers, and radio operators, all condensed into a folder of reconnaissance photographs that would convince the most paranoid man in Europe to look the wrong way at exactly the wrong moment. June 5th, 1944, 2:47 a.m. In In Portsmouth Harbor, General Dwight Eisenhower stands on the deck of a converted fishing vessel, staring across the English Channel toward the coast of France. Behind him, the largest invasion fleet in human history rides at anchor. 6,000 ships carrying 156,000 Allied soldiers toward 5 beaches in Normandy that most of them can't even pronounce. The weight of the moment presses down like a physical force. Everything depends on the success of the greatest deception in military history. If Hitler's reserves are waiting on the beaches, if the fictional 1st United States Army Group has failed to convince German High Command, then dawn will bring catastrophe. General? His aide approaches quietly. Final intelligence report from London. Eisenhower unfolds the message with hands that barely tremble, despite the magnitude of what he's about to unleash. The report is everything Operation Fortitude was designed to achieve. German panzer reserves remain concentrated at Calais. Wehrmacht beach defenses in Normandy are exactly as predicted, formidable, but not reinforced. Most critically, Hitler still believes the main invasion is coming 150 miles east of the real target. 4 months of inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, and carefully orchestrated lies have apparently worked. But apparently isn't good enough when you're gambling with the lives of 150,000 men. At the same moment, 180 miles away in the Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler sleeps soundly in his bunker bedroom. On his nightstand lies Heinrich Müller's latest intelligence assessment. Allied invasion imminent. Primary target confirmed, Calais. Recommend maintaining current defensive deployments. The document is signed in red ink and marked immediate priority. 3 hours later, as the first Allied paratroopers descend into the darkness over Normandy, German coastal radar operators detect the massive invasion fleet. Frantic radio messages flash to Wehrmacht High Command. Major Allied naval concentration approaching Norman coastline. Request immediate reinforcement. But the response from Berlin is devastating in its precision. Normandy operation assessed as diversionary action. Primary invasion force remains concentrated opposite Calais. Maintain defensive positions. Do not redeploy reserves. This single command, based entirely on fictional intelligence, condemns thousands of German soldiers to face the D-Day landings with half the force they could have assembled. The Ghost Army has achieved its purpose without firing a shot. Lieutenant Hans Wegner, manning a concrete bunker overlooking Omaha Beach, watches in growing horror as Allied landing craft emerge from the pre-dawn darkness. He radios frantically to headquarters. Enemy landing in division strength. Request immediate armor support. The response crushes his hopes. No reserves available. 21st Panzer Division committed to Calais defense. Hold positions with current assets. Wegner stares at the horizon, where Allied ships stretch beyond the limits of vision. He commands 8 artillery pieces and 43 men. Approaching his beach are 34,000 American soldiers supported by naval gunfire from 18 battleships. The mathematical impossibility of his situation becomes clear. He's fighting the real invasion with weapons positioned to stop a fictional one. As dawn breaks over the Norman coast, the success of Operation Fortitude becomes mathematically visible. Allied intelligence estimates that German defenders face invasion forces at 3-to-1 odds instead of the 1-to-1 ratio that would have made D-Day potentially impossible. 15 German divisions sit uselessly at Calais, waiting for Patton's Phantom Army. The human cost of the deception becomes clear in the first hour. German resistance at Normandy, while fierce, lacks the concentrated armor that could have driven the Allies back into the sea. American and British casualties, though heavy, remain within acceptable limits. The Ghost divisions have saved more lives than most real armies ever destroy. At 8:30 a.m., General Omar Bradley receives confirmation that all 5 landing beaches are secure. Allied forces are moving inland against lighter resistance than predicted. The message he sends to London is brief, but carries the weight of 4 years of planning. Operation Neptune successful. Fortitude remains effective. In his Kent command post, Colonel Dudley Clark reads Bradley's message with quiet satisfaction. Across southeast England, his elaborate fictional army continues its performance. German reconnaissance flights that afternoon will photograph the same inflatable tanks, the same fake radio antennas, the same theatrical supply dumps. The deception must continue until Allied forces in Normandy are too strong to dislodge. For 3 more weeks, Fusag maintains its phantom presence. German High Command, convinced that Normandy is a diversion, keeps waiting for the real invasion that will never come. By the time Hitler realizes his mistake, Allied forces have established an unbreakable foothold in France. The most successful military operation in history was fought entirely with rubber, canvas, and carefully manipulated human psychology. An army that never existed had defeated the most powerful military force on Earth, proving that in warfare, perception can be more deadly than reality. 3 weeks after D-Day, in a bombed-out building that once housed Berlin's Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Wilhelm Ketterer stared at intelligence reports that made no sense. As Nazi Germany's chief psychological warfare analyst, he'd spent 4 years studying Allied deception tactics. Now, with Allied forces advancing across Normandy, he was conducting the most important analysis of his career, understanding how the Reich's intelligence apparatus had been so completely fooled. The evidence was overwhelming. Ketterer muttered, spreading reconnaissance photographs across his desk for the 100th time. Every image showed clear proof of massive Allied buildup opposite Calais. Tank formations, supply depots, communication arrays, all positioned exactly where military doctrine predicted they should be for an invasion of the Pas de Calais. What Ketterer couldn't see was the ghostly truth behind each photograph. The tank formations were deflating even as he studied them. British teams were already packing inflatable Shermans into transport trucks, preparing to redeploy them for the next phase of deception operations in the Mediterranean. The supply depots contained nothing but painted canvas designed to cast convincing shadows from reconnaissance altitude. The psychological architecture of Operation Fortitude had exploited fundamental human cognitive biases that even trained intelligence professionals couldn't overcome. German analysts, under pressure to provide accurate assessments, unconsciously sought confirming evidence for their initial conclusions. Once they identified Calais as the logical target, every subsequent observation was interpreted through that framework. Look at this radio traffic. Ketterer's assistant, Major Fritz Brandt, spread transcription sheets across the photographs. Thousands of intercepted messages about fuel shortages, equipment maintenance, personnel transfers. The communication pattern is entirely consistent with massive American armored units. Brandt's analysis was technically perfect and completely wrong. The radio messages were real, transmitted by actual Allied operators using authentic encryption procedures, but every message described fictional operations, imaginary supply problems, and non-existent units. Allied intelligence had weaponized the German addiction to comprehensive data analysis. The genius of Fortitude lay in understanding that German intelligence doctrine emphasized multiple source confirmation. No single piece of evidence was trusted. Assessments required corroboration from reconnaissance flights, signals intelligence, human sources, and pattern analysis. The Allies simply created fake evidence that satisfied every German verification method. But how did we miss the real buildup in Portsmouth? Ketterer demanded, studying maps that showed the stunning reality of Allied concentration. While German attention fixated on Kent, the largest invasion fleet in history had assembled 150 miles west without triggering significant intelligence alerts. The answer revealed another psychological trap. German reconnaissance focused on areas where they expected to find evidence of invasion preparations. Dover and Calais represented the shortest channel crossing, therefore the most logical staging area. Allied planners deliberately reinforced this assumption, creating theatrical displays that consumed German intelligence resources, while the real invasion prepared elsewhere. Moreover, confirmation bias had created a feedback loop within German intelligence structure. Field agents reported what headquarters wanted to hear. Photo interpreters found evidence that supported existing assessments. Signals intelligence analysts highlighted radio traffic that confirmed predetermined conclusions. Each level of the intelligence hierarchy reinforced the collective delusion. We were fighting our own preconceptions, Ketterer realized with growing horror. Every strength of our intelligence system became a weakness they exploited. The personal cost of the deception extended beyond military defeat. Intelligence officers throughout the Nazi hierarchy faced career destruction for their role in the greatest intelligence failure in German history. Müller himself had been transferred to a penal battalion on the Eastern Front. Photo interpreters were reassigned to clerical duties. The entire organizational culture that prized systematic analysis and methodical verification had been turned against itself. But the deeper psychological impact was more disturbing. If German intelligence, the most sophisticated in the world, could be so thoroughly deceived, what did that say about the nature of truth itself? How could any nation trust its own perceptions when reality could be so expertly manipulated? Ketterer's final report, filed 3 days before Berlin fell, contained a chilling assessment. Operation Fortitude succeeded because it gave us exactly what we expected to see. Our own rationality became their weapon. They understood that human beings, even trained professionals, believe what fits their existing worldview. The Allies didn't just deceive our intelligence apparatus, they weaponized human psychology itself. The implications extended far beyond World War II. Fortitude had proved that perception could be more powerful than reality, that carefully crafted lies could defeat factual truth. In an age before television, before computers, before digital manipulation, Allied forces had created an alternate reality so convincing that it changed the course of human history. As Soviet shells began falling on Berlin, Ketterer burned his files and prepared for capture. His last act as a Nazi intelligence officer was destroying evidence of the most successful psychological warfare operation ever conducted. But the lessons of Fortitude would outlive the Reich and reshape how future conflicts would be fought. In the emerging Cold War, both superpowers would study Operation Fortitude with intense interest. The age of nuclear warfare would make traditional military deception impossible, but the psychological principles that fooled Hitler would find new applications in propaganda, disinformation, and the manipulation of global public opinion. December 1947, 3 years after the war's end. In a classified briefing room beneath the Pentagon, General William Wild Bill Donovan spreads operational files across a polished mahogany table. As head of the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, he's studying the most successful deception operation in military history, not for historical interest, but as a blueprint for the emerging Cold War. Gentlemen, Donovan addresses a room full of intelligence analysts and psychological warfare specialists. Operation Fortitude didn't just help win World War II. It changed warfare forever. The question is, how do we apply these lessons against the Soviet Union? The assembled experts represent a new type of military professional, specialists in perception management, psychological operations, and what would later be called information warfare. They understand that Fortitude proved something revolutionary. In modern conflict, controlling what enemies believe can be more powerful than controlling what they see. Major Frank Wisner, destined to become one of the CIA's most influential operatives, raises his hand. The technical aspects are clear, but what made Fortitude psychologically effective? Why did German intelligence accept fictional evidence over reality? Dr. Margaret Hayes, a psychologist recruited from Harvard's social science department, provides the answer that will shape decades of American intelligence doctrine. Confirmation bias combined with institutional pressure. German analysts were rewarded for finding evidence that supported leadership expectations. The Allies exploited that organizational structure. This insight would prove prophetic. Throughout the Cold War, both superpowers would weaponize confirmation bias, feeding enemy intelligence services carefully crafted information designed to reinforce existing fears and misconceptions. The Phantom Armies of 1944 would evolve into phantom missile gaps, fictional technological breakthroughs, and imaginary military capabilities. But Fortitude's influence extended beyond intelligence agencies. Madison Avenue advertising executives studied the operation's psychological techniques, learning how to make consumers believe they needed products they'd never wanted. Hollywood directors analyzed its theatrical methods, discovering how to create convincing illusions with minimal resources. Even academic psychologists found inspiration in how the Allies had manipulated enemy perceptions on such a massive scale. The technological implications were equally profound. Inflatable tanks in 1944 would evolve into sophisticated decoy systems during the Cold War. Fake radio traffic would become electronic warfare designed to confuse enemy radar and communication systems. The visual deception techniques pioneered in Kent would inspire camouflage technologies that made real military equipment invisible to satellite surveillance. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy's advisors explicitly referenced Fortitude when developing strategies to mislead Soviet intelligence about American military preparations. The same psychological principles that fooled Hitler nearly triggered nuclear war when both superpowers began seeing fictional threats in each other's legitimate defensive measures. The operation's legacy became visible in conflicts throughout the latter half of the 20th century. During the Vietnam War, American forces used elaborate deception operations inspired by Fortitude to confuse North Vietnamese intelligence. Israeli military planners studied the operation before the 1967 Six-Day War, using similar techniques to convince Arab nations that Israeli forces were positioned differently than reality. But perhaps Fortitude's most significant legacy lies in how it changed civilian understanding of truth itself. By 1970, the generation that grew up hearing stories about the Ghost Army had developed a healthy skepticism about official information. If Allied forces could fool Hitler for months using rubber tanks and fake radio stations, how could anyone trust what governments claimed about anything? This skepticism would prove crucial during the Vietnam War, when American citizens began questioning military casualty reports, progress assessments, and justifications for continued fighting. The success of Fortitude had taught an entire generation that official information could be deliberately false, professionally crafted, and completely convincing, even when describing events that never happened. The digital age amplified these lessons exponentially. Modern deepfake technology allows the creation of video evidence that's as fictional as Fortitude's inflatable tanks, but infinitely more convincing. Social media platforms spread disinformation with the same viral efficiency that carried fake intelligence reports through German command structures in 1944. Today's information warfare specialists study Fortitude not as ancient history, but as a foundational text for understanding how perception shapes reality in democratic societies. The operation proved that sufficiently sophisticated lies can defeat well-documented truth, that confirmation bias makes even intelligent people vulnerable to manipulation, and that institutional structures designed to ensure accuracy can become weapons in the hands of skilled deceivers. In corporate boardrooms, political campaign headquarters, and intelligence agencies worldwide, The lessons of Operation Fortitude continue shaping how power is exercised in the modern world. The Ghost Army may have disbanded in 1945, but its tactical principles live on wherever truth battles fiction for control of human understanding. The most successful military deception in history had taught humanity a disturbing lesson. Reality is often less important than the story people choose to believe. Today, as you watch this video on your smartphone, armies of digital phantoms are waging the same war that inflatable tanks fought in 1944. The tools have changed. Rubber and canvas replaced by algorithms and deepfakes. But the battlefield remains unchanged. The human mind's vulnerability to sophisticated deception. In a nondescript office building in St. Petersburg, Russia, operators sit before computer screens generating the modern equivalent of Operation Fortitude. They create fictional social media accounts with believable backstories, fabricate video evidence of events that never happened, and spread carefully crafted disinformation designed to make foreign populations question their own government's credibility. The Ghost Army has evolved from physical props to digital phantoms. The psychological principles remain identical. Just as German intelligence officers in 1944 found confirming evidence for their pre-existing beliefs, social media users today share news articles that reinforce their political views without verifying accuracy. The same confirmation bias that made Wehrmacht analysts trust photographs of inflatable tanks makes modern citizens believe obviously fabricated stories because they align with existing opinions. Consider the mathematical similarity. In 1944, a few hundred Allied deception specialists convinced millions of Germans that a fictional army threatened their homeland. Today, a few dozen programmers can convince millions of Americans that fictional scandals threaten their democracy. The scale of impact per operator has increased exponentially, but the core methodology, exploiting human psychological weaknesses, remains unchanged. Dr. Jennifer Perez, who directs the Digital Forensics Laboratory at Georgetown University, explains the connection. Operation Fortitude succeeded because it gave German intelligence exactly what they expected to find. Modern disinformation campaigns work the same way. They tell people stories that confirm their existing fears and biases. The technical sophistication has reached levels that would have seemed magical to Dudley Clark's deception planners. Artificial intelligence can now generate photographs of people who don't exist, create convincing videos of politicians saying things they never said, and fabricate evidence of events that never happened. The inflatable tanks of 1944 were crude props compared to digital phantoms that can fool forensic analysis. But the human element remains constant. Modern information warfare, like Operation Fortitude, succeeds because it exploits fundamental flaws in how human beings process information. People believe evidence that supports their worldview and reject evidence that contradicts it. They trust information from sources they like and distrust identical information from sources they dislike. These psychological vulnerabilities, unchanged since 1944, make democratic societies as susceptible to deception as Hitler's intelligence apparatus. The stakes have escalated beyond anything the Fortitude planners could have imagined. Where their operation influenced military strategy, modern information warfare shapes election outcomes, public health decisions, and international relations. The same psychological techniques that kept German panzer divisions away from Normandy now determine which candidates win political office, which vaccines citizens accept, and which countries form military alliances. Dr. Sarah Chen, who studies cognitive bias at MIT, offers a chilling assessment. We're all living in a version of Hitler's bunker now, making decisions based on information we can't verify, from sources we can't trust, using psychological mechanisms we don't understand. The democratization of deception tools means that anyone can now deploy Fortitude-level psychological warfare. A teenager with a laptop can create convincing evidence of police brutality, terrorist attacks, or natural disasters. Political campaigns use micro-targeting algorithms to send different messages to different voter groups, creating multiple fictional realities that all seem equally convincing to their intended audiences. Perhaps most disturbing, the success of modern disinformation has created a truth recession where factual information becomes indistinguishable from sophisticated fiction. When everything can be faked, nothing can be trusted. When all sources are potentially compromised, rational decision-making becomes impossible. Society begins to mirror the German intelligence community of 1944, confident in their assessments, but completely detached from reality. The solution, if one exists, may lie in understanding the original success of Operation Fortitude. The Allies won because they studied their enemy's psychology more carefully than their enemies studied their own vulnerabilities. German intelligence failed because they trusted their analytical systems more than they questioned their assumptions. Modern democratic societies face the same test that defeated Hitler's regime. Can institutions designed for analyzing information adapt when the information itself becomes weaponized? Can human psychology evolve to recognize digital deception as effectively as physical camouflage? The Ghost Army of 1944 saved democracy by fooling dictatorship. Today's digital phantoms threaten democracy by exploiting its fundamental assumptions about truth, evidence, and rational discourse. The ultimate irony is that the techniques developed to defeat fascism may now be democracy's greatest vulnerability. As you finish watching this video, consider, in a world where seeing is no longer believing, where expert analysis can be systematically deceived, and where truth itself has become a battlefield, who do you trust? And perhaps more importantly, how do you know you should? The war between perception and reality continues. The only question is whether human civilization is winning.